Next Monday, the NTSB will begin the tedious task of creating a transcript of as many words as possible that they can understand, and also the sound on the data recorder that was recovered from the Faro. But now we have a much better timeline of the last hours on board the cargo ship before it sank last October when it lost power and drifted into the path of Hurricane Joaquin. Maritime attorney Rod Sullivan is joining us live this morning in our newsroom to take a closer look, quite frankly, at this timeline. Good morning to you, Mr. Sullivan. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Jen.
Let me begin with this, because we know that the NTSB, because they've come up with this timeline, has given this a cursory listen to. Are you surprised that there was nothing, certainly in the release that they sent out to the media yesterday, that says, yep, this is what caused this?
No, I'm not surprised, and I'm not even sure that after they have the full transcript, they're going to make that kind of conclusion. But I think the most important thing that came out of the NTSB press release was this idea that the ship was already flooding before it lost power. And that indicates that there was some type of breach in the hull, and that's what caused the engines to shut down, not vice versa.
So let's take a look at the timeline closely here, if we can. So we know that on September 30th at 5:37 in the morning, the recordings began, which was about 8 hours after the Faro left Jacksonville. Then the next day, October 1st at 6:13 in the morning, the vessel, as you mentioned, begins taking on water. The Faro loses power, but not propulsion. Would that suggest to you, because there have been a number of questions about the age of this ship and the crew, some of the crew that was on board, perhaps there to constantly maintain it because there were constant issues, would that suggest to you at 6:13 that whatever happened happened suddenly and quickly and they really didn't expect it?
Well, you know, during the hearings, Captain Lawrence, who was the designated person ashore, said that Captain Davidson told him there was free communication between the sea and the inside of the ship. That indicates some kind of hull rupture, and hull ruptures only happen rather suddenly.
So 7:10 then, Captain Davidson calls Tote. A person on shore says that the crew controlled the water, but the ship was now listing 15 degrees and then lost propulsion. Why might that happen? I mean, we know the listing is from the water coming on, but why the loss in propulsion? Is it because of a power failure?
It could have been because of the vessel listing so far to one side. You know, boilers intend to operate on ships that rock back and forth, but if you have a ship that's listing to one side only and it's still hitting the waves, that could cause water to slosh out of the boilers into the turbines, and that could possibly have caused the engines to shut down.
Okay, so we know 5 minutes later the Coast Guard received the distress alert from Faro. And then at 7:30, the Coast Guard receives notification that the Faro lost the propulsion, its listing. And then by 7:30, the master ordered abandoned ship and sounded the alarm. So that is, by my count, about an hour and 15 minutes after it first lost power. Is that too long for the captain to have waited to abandon ship?
Yeah, I really think it is. I mean, the idea that he knew he lost propulsion at 6:13, but he's not even calling the company for 57 minutes. He's not calling the Coast Guard for another 5 or 10 minutes after that. That's a long period of time during a crisis not to tell anybody where you are and what your situation was. You know, if he had called the Coast Guard earlier, if he had called the company earlier, they would have at least known where the ship was. They would have known where to begin their search. It's tough to explain why a captain in a hurricane with no power would wait 57 minutes before calling anybody.
Especially since this was a seasoned captain. I mean, he's not new to the ocean.
That actually may be the problem. You know, he has been in the Alaska run, he's been in heavy weathers, and maybe his feeling was, well, I've seen worse, and therefore I'm not going to call the company until it's absolutely dire.
So we know that the master ordered abandoned ship at 7:30, as I mentioned. 10 minutes later, the recording ends. Is that to assume then that in that short amount of time that the VDR was underwater?
Well, not the VDR so much as the emergency diesel generator. You know, when the ship lost its power, the emergency diesel generator comes on, and that was supplying the power for the VDR. I assume that when the VDR stops recording, that's when the emergency diesel generator, which is located on the bridge deck, is submerged and no longer operating.
10 minutes. Rod, is that enough time for an entire crew to get to safety and into those life rafts?
No, it really isn't. Hopefully some of the crew had gotten into their survival suits beforehand and had started making plans to abandon ship. But no, it really isn't enough time. You know, even under the best of circumstances, getting everybody into a lifeboat takes more than 10 minutes. Launching a life raft and getting into the life raft, again, takes more than 10 minutes. So it really did not give the crew much time to get to safety.
Rod Sullivan joining us live this morning. Thank you for your take on this, Rod. Do appreciate it.
Thank you, Jen.